There's a big shift now into, for the want of a better word, regenerative agriculture all around the world. And there's been a few of us that have been at it now for probably 30 years and been getting a small adoption. That momentum is growing, and I think the role of your generation is to really not only continue that movement but ramp it up, because we don't have a lot of time. We need to fix this planet real quick, because we've just about got it stuffed. This presentation is going to start in a little bit similar manner to the one I did before, but a big majority of this talk is totally new. But we need to present, or at least explain, really what pasture cropping is to some of the people that may not know, even though many people now know my story and how this happened, or how it evolved. I started using the word regenerative many years ago, 25 or more years ago, which is interesting. And I've often used the title I have here, Profitable Regenerative Agriculture. Obviously, agriculture needs to be profitable, but I was using the word regenerative a long time ago. It is no point agriculture being profitable if it is going to destroy the very farm that we own. And not only that, if we start destroying our farms, and what I mean by that is primarily as we start losing plants and then start losing soil and soil structure, it starts to collapse, and then our farms become less productive, and they really do collapse, and then we need more inputs just to prop them up. So the word regenerative is an important one. We need to be able to regenerate our farms as we're practicing agriculture. Because if we don't regenerate our farms, we are going to destroy this very planet that we live on as well. It is very important that many people totally overlook. Yep. Now, just the property here that I'm on, we've been here, family's been here, great-grandparents settled here in the 1860s. So we've been here for a fair while. It's granite soil. It's certainly not highly fertile soil. It's 2,000 acres here, 600 millimetre rainfall, and it's in the central tablelands of New South Wales. And this map of Australia that I've got here shows approximately where it is. Like much of Eastern Australia, we went through a very severe last 3 years of the worst drought ever recorded, at least for certainly in my great grandparents' time, from the 1860s to now. It was certainly the worst year we've ever seen. But we should be able to buffer against those types of events. Just what we do here, our main enterprise is merino sheep, and interestingly, my great grandparents also started with merino sheep in the 1860s. However, I've added a lot of different other enterprises onto that. We do some cattle trading, not a lot of cattle trading, depends on seasons. We grow about a quarter of the place, or in acres, about 500 acres is pasture cropped each year, and mostly to oats, but this year we've got quite a lot of barley growing, but oats, barley, wheat, depending on what is profitable at the time. We run a merino stud, which is my father started in 1949. Also, we have one of the larger Kelpie working dogs in the world, actually. We sell dogs all in Australia, but in many other countries as well. Now, the last enterprise here, native grass seed, it's a very important one. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later, and the potential in native grass seed as a human food source as well. Now, and so we harvest, like I said, native grass seed. it's a very important enterprise for us now, and a very profitable one for us. So pasture cropping, what is pasture cropping? That photo, which is an old photo now, it really illustrates pasture cropping very, very well. Okay, we don't necessarily have to harvest grain in pasture cropping, but it illustrates it well in the green in that photo are the warm season grasses starting to emerge from the crop as we're harvesting the crop. They are dormant in the winter, and the crop has been sown into those grasses when they were dormant. Pasture cropping, I've used this slide and this bottle of beer in this for a long time now. Pasture cropping was developed by myself and Darryl Clough in 1993, and Cloughie and I were zero tilling at the time and using a lot of herbicide, killing a lot of native grasses as well as weeds and everything else with Roundup. So, but we reasoned one night when we had a few beers that and challenged what we were doing of why we were killing these or trying to kill these native grasses, because we were aware that they went dormant in the winter. So the question was asked, why are we trying to kill these things? And that was really where pasture cropping came from. And then I guess I developed it from there and fine-tuned it from there. So pasture cropping is actually perennial cover cropping. We hear a lot about cover cropping now, or not necessarily a lot, but more and more about cover cropping. A lot of the cover cropping work's coming out of the US. There's some people doing some really good work in the US on cover crops. But pasture cropping is unique in that it is perennial cover cropping. And it's really the first real change in agriculture probably for 10,000 years. And in that, we're not killing the grasses that we're sowing the crop into. And since agriculture has evolved or developed, we have set out to kill everything where the crop is growing, either with a plough or now with herbicides. So just a little bit on cover cropping, as it says that cover cropping uses annual plants to create mulch, control weeds and improve soil health. Pasture cropping uses perennial plants to create mulch, control weeds and improve soil health. So there is a difference in that. We don't have to sow our perennial plants. They're there all the time. They just go in and out of dormancy. But with cover cropping, annual plants, it is a requirement to sow annual plants to then plant the cash crop into. So the question that we should ask is why would we grow crops using pasture cropping techniques? Why not just stick with what we're doing? And I'm just going to go through what happened with me. I'm not going to go back. I often in my longer talks go back into my family history and what happened over really 100 years on the property here. But I'm not going to go that far back in time. We'll be here for 3 hours. So why would we change from what we're doing and adopt pasture cropping? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. It is more profitable. It can be more profitable. One of the best things that it does, which is often overlooked, we can restore our grasslands with it, or perennial pastures. It doesn't have to be native grassland. We can produce stock feed, we can produce grain. And another thing that it does, it improves soil structure, soil carbon, nutrient cycling, water holding capacity, all of those things. And over time, we can reduce our costs, and which means less fertilizer, herbicides, insecticides. All of those things we can start to reduce, and there's very good reasons why that happens. Now, if we look at traditional cropping methods and what we do when we're either ploughing or using herbicides, if we look at just a paddock that is being prepared for sowing, we need to ask a question: how much stock food is produced while that paddock is being prepared? There is none produced. It's just bare ground. How much pasture is destroyed? All of it is destroyed. How much soil structure is destroyed? Both ploughing in particular is very destructive and creates poor structured soil. Zero tilling is better and can improve soil structure with zero tilling, but then we're still locked into using a vast array of pesticides with that. So how many nutrients are lost? A lot. Bare soil will lose nitrogen and lose carbon and associated nutrients as well. And the obvious thing that bare soil, whether it is bare soil because the herbicide has been used or whether ploughing is used, is erosion, which we can't afford. So when a crop is grown for grain or forage, the result simply is destroyed soil, destroyed pasture, and then a need to re-sow pasture. We've accepted that we need to re-sow pasture as a normal part of agriculture, but we not necessarily. We can enhance our pasture by using different techniques without re-sowing them. So these methods, pasture cropping certainly can produce good crops for grain or forage, and that often requires a different goal or a different aim. It depends on what our goals are, just what we're trying to achieve. When pasture cropping is done, we've got grazing right up to the point of sowing, so we don't lose much grazing at all, if any. And the reason I sow a quarter of this place, like the pasture crops a year, is I don't have to reduce my stock numbers to grow the crop. So, but the process can improve soil structure, improve soil carbon, improve nutrient cycling, reduce costs, and the big one is it will restore the farm and soil ecosystems. But it is far more than simply sowing a crop into grass. People often think that pasture cropping is a simple process. And okay, the adoption of it can be quite simple. The reason it works is quite complex. We're working very close to natural systems, working in harmony with Mother Nature, really. That side of it is quite complex, but the application of it can be relatively straightforward, and it's not difficult. So pasture cropping is perennial cover cropping, a perennial cover cropping technique where we are zero tilling or direct drilling into dormant perennial grass or grassland. We're combining grazing and cropping and managing them in a way where each one benefits the other. We're using animals to prepare the paddock to put the crop in. So we're mulching and manuring. Manure that the sheep put on, we're using large mobs of animals, sheep or cattle. It doesn't matter what the animals are. And they're adding a lot of nutrients, manure and urine on that paddock, which benefits the crop. The crop itself improves the soil and enhances the grassland. So they're complementary. We're using zero tilling machinery, and there's nothing new in that. The standard zero tilling or direct drilling machinery, which has been around now for 30 years or more. Never ever ploughing. Well, never ploughing as in turning soil upside down with disc ploughs and those types of things. and never killing perennial species. We focus on keeping those perennial species alive. Weeds are managed by creating large quantities of thick litter by using sound grazing management of livestock. Livestock grazing, good grazing management practices are essential in pasture cropping. And in the course, I talk a lot more about grazing and using the methods that Alan Savoury developed, really, to putting large mobs on paddocks to prepare them to put a pasture crop in. Now, pasture cropping doesn't necessarily need to be, or it isn't necessarily an organic system. It can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Depends on your goals. We can use very selective herbicides to manage weeds to get a better grain crop result. So it just depends on where you're at and what you're trying to achieve. Many of the crops that I sow here now on Winona could be classified as organic. Some of them we don't use herbicide at all, and we're moving more and more towards biological and organic type fertilizers. Just this little graph here illustrates just the growing period. The red line on there are warm season grasses. And this graph applies, well, it's obviously a southern hemisphere graph. If there's anyone here from northern hemisphere, everything's reversed around. So in the winter months, that warm season grass is going into dormancy, which creates a niche to plant a winter or a cool season crop into. And that can be oats, wheat, barley, and it can be now a multi-species crop, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, or quite a lot more about later. Now, we can also manipulate those warm season grasses to get a better result or a different result as well. And we can manipulate them in many ways. We can manipulate them with grazing management and animals. We can manipulate them with very selective herbicide. We can manipulate them with even different machinery as well. Or different seeding machinery is what I meant by that. So why pasture crop? And why did I develop pasture cropping? Just move through this fairly quickly. I grew up in high input agriculture. My father adopted the Green Revolution, or the Green Revolution techniques from the 1950s on, which was, and he applied a lot of fertilizer, phosphorus fertilizer to the property here, superphosphate, was annually sown to, well, annually fertilized and then sown to clovers and ryegrass, those types of annual pasture species. He was ploughing and cultivating to sow crops, as everyone did in that era, but using high rates of fertilizer and pesticides, and set stock grazing, no rotation. And it did work well in that era. It was productive and profitable. However, ecologically, it did collapse. And it started to crash in the 1970s. The fertilizer costs started to become too high. Cost of sowing pasture was too high. Rainfall no longer infiltrated. Soil life structure became acidic. Salinity problems, trees dying, all those things. And what worked really well for quite a long time for my father was started to crash, and financially it started to become a serious problem. And by the way, that form of agriculture was what was recommended at the time. It was the best form. The best form of agriculture recommended by all of our Department of Agriculture, all of the scientists all around the world. Now, this is some photos of me also destroying the farm in the from the 1970s on, 1970s, 1980s. Ploughing paddocks, sowing, full disturbance. In the bottom photo there, we're actually spraying out insecticide, which at that time was DDT, to kill crop damaging insects. So Yeah, I've had my fair share of killing everything on this farm also. In reality, what we were doing then was killing things that wanted to grow, and growing things that wanted to die. Really, we didn't have our mix right. We were selecting plants that didn't suit this environment, which is exactly what we still do, not here on Winona, but around the world. We do now, and is recommended best science. So Winona, the property Winona lost its perennial grasses and replaced by annual pasture. It was infested with weeds and unproductive. These high input methods were costing us over $80,000 annually. It was costing my father in particular $80,000 annually, just to keep the place ticking over and apply fertiliser and pesticides. Now, I'm going to move on. I changed before, mostly because we got burnt out in a fire in 1979. I've left that little bit out of here too, so I could move on to some of the stuff we're doing on the farm now. But 1985, I started zero-till crop, so I was probably one of the early adopters of zero-tilling. Weed control was Roundup in late spring, 3 or 4 more herbicide applications pre-sowing, herbicide in crop, fertiliser at sowing, and the crop yields were okay, but it did crash on us. So, and that's the way crops are still growing now and recommended now. I was doing this in 1985, and most of the crops are still grown the same way. So, all that we've really done in agriculture with modern agricultural methods, we have simply replaced the plough we used to plough our paddocks with, replaced the plough with a boom spray. The basic philosophy of growing crops hasn't changed. We're still just trying to kill everything. We're just using a different method of doing it. So how do I fix the problems of the mid-1980s? Agronomic advice in 1990 was double the fertiliser rates, add urea in crop, use fungicides, use insecticides, better weed control. That advice is the same that is given today. If you ask how to advice on sowing crops, that's exactly the same thing they'll tell you. I didn't accept that advice. Remember, this is in 1990, so 30 years ago. I didn't accept that advice. It didn't add up financially. The recommended amount of fertiliser was toxic to wheat plants. I thought there's got to be something seriously wrong if the amount of fertiliser that we're applying is toxic to the plant. It will kill the plant we're sowing. So how do I fix those problems? But which I'm going to get onto shortly. Now, if we look at this graph, I find it really interesting. This is a Canadian graph, and it sort of backs up with what happened to my father, really. Canadian graph from 1926 to 2016. And through the 1930s to almost 1980, farmers were going okay. This is in Canada. I'm working with some people now to put an Australian graph together, which will be very, very similar to this. It won't be much different. This information is available, actually. I think we put it on the Pasture Cropping course site, so you can look at it there. Now, so what it actually shows was farmers going okay, but agribusiness getting bloody greedy from 1980 on, making billions of dollars, and farmers going broke. That is criminal, really. If you have a serious look at that, if that doesn't make you angry, I don't know what will, because that should. That's what's wrong with agriculture worldwide. So how did I change? I looked at low input agriculture. I went totally against the curve. I looked at low input agriculture, stopped using pasture fertiliser and pesticides, focus on ground cover, applied holistic plant grazing, and started pasture growing in 1993, combined pasture cropping and holistic plant grazing in 1995. And then I focused on restoring the property to grassland. I'm going to move on here because I'm realising this clock in front of me is ticking past. So in other words,
mate,
the way we
take your
graze
time.
animals, okay,
Yeah.
the way we graze animals is working. It would kill grasslands, destroy the soil ecosystem, and destroy the farm ecosystem. The way crops are growing using ploughs and excessive herbicides and pesticides also kills grassland, destroys the soil ecosystem, and destroys the farm ecosystem. Both they are extremely destructive, and we need to find another way. And I guess that's what this course is about, is showing people another way. There are different ways of doing this. This isn't the only way of doing things better. But we certainly need to get our grazing better, and we need to get at the way we grow crops better. So in other words, increasing fertiliser and pesticides will not fix our farms. The farm and soil ecosystems are broken. That's what's wrong. It's not lack of fertiliser and pesticides, it's the problem. It's broken soil and farm ecosystems. Okay. Just want to go through an update on Winona this year. It's been a horrible year for the whole planet with the coronavirus, but we've been plodding on here. As all new farmers or people that own farms or live on farms know, it's fairly easy to isolate on a farm. So farms can go on as almost normal, which is handy. Now, many of you may have heard, or should probably have heard of multispecies pasture cropping. We know that multispecies pasture cropping will produce superior quality and quantity of stock feed. We get faster improvements in soil health, soil structure, carbon and nutrient cycling. Add nitrogen with legumes and other nutrients, weed control, insect control, and we can still harvest the cereal crop after grazing. Now, what is interesting, we know some of that we know those things work, but in Australia here, there's been no actual research done on it. So I decided that there's only one way to answer this. I would do some on-farm trials, and it's not actually research work. Well, it is, but it would be defined more as on-farm trial, to see whether the statements that many people have been making, including myself, are correct. I was seeing this happen, but these trials are very interesting. Now, what we've done is set up a trial of multi-species crop or pasture crop versus comparing that to a barley crop in a grazing trial. Now, so I'll just move on here. The paddock was subdivided into two paddocks, 2 6-hectare paddocks each, both paddocks that were pasture cropped. Areas were grazed heavily, and we did use herbicide on this because this is an MLA-funded land care trial. So I wanted to make sure that we did it right. So I did use flow rates of a herbicide called Pasture, and there's more information again on that in this course. It's a desiccant. It's different. It works in a different way to Roundup. I'm not saying any herbicides are good at all, but it's kinder to perennial plants. That particular herbicide won't kill perennial plants. Anyway, it was signed on the 10th of March this year. So what the main thing we obviously said that we were monitoring, the main thing we were monitoring was lamb weight increases, but we also are monitoring for soil carbon, change in perennial species diversity, crop biomass, soil chemistry change, and profit as well. The main data we've got back at the moment is the lamb weight increases. Now, just some information on the crop itself. What the barley crop, single species crop was sown with barley at 50 kilos per hectare. We put a conventional fertiliser on it, which crop left 15, which has nitrogen, phosphorus and sulphur. The multi-species crop had also had barley, but at 30 kilos, it reduced the rate of barley on it. Had field peas, faba beans, forage, brassica, tillage radish and turnip. Those are at the rates that you can see on the screen. It also had the same rate of fertiliser on it. The cost of seed, and all this is important. We need to know what all this stuff costs. Now, I valued, because Australia's been in a drought for 3 years, the cost of buying cereal seeds this year's been very expensive, $2,000 a tonne, which is totally out of the ballpark. So I had some barley here, and we used it, and we valued it at a more normal price of around about $500 a tonne to get these figures of, a bit sensible. So 50 kilos of barley was worth $100 a hectare, just for the cost of the seed. The multi-species mix worked out to be $143 a hectare. So we'll move on from that. In total, the total cost of each of those was, the multi-species crop was $183 a hectare for seed and fertiliser. Cost of the barley crop was $140 a hectare, seed and fertiliser. We put split the lambs in half, and we put 217 lambs on each of those 16 hectare paddocks for 2 months. We didn't rotate them, we just simply left them there so that we weren't going to be influencing or changing any of the data. The grazing results. I'm not going to go through this graph, but it'll be available for you to have a look at in more detail. What I have got, and this is a bit messy, but I'm going to simplify this. I said the numbers wrong a while ago. 228 lambs on each paddock for 57 days. The weight gains per day on the barley crop, single crop, was roughly 1.5 grams per day. On the multi-species crop was 300 grams, so virtually double. The weight gains in 57 days, or virtually 2 months, was 8.5 kilos on the barley crop and 18 kilos weight gain on the multi-species crop. Looking at lamb prices are very high at the moment. Dressed lamb prices they're actually close to $8, but I used $7 here to be conservative, and then merino lambs as well. So the increase the increase in weight on these paddock on the barley crop was $33 per lamb compared to $63 per lamb increase. So if we bought lambs, put them on there, that's the profit we could make on each of those. The profit per hectare, which is interesting in itself, the profit per hectare, because we were running 38 lambs per hectare, was $1,100 on the barley and $2,500 profit on the multi-species crop. That's minus the sowing crops. Now that is quite amazing, really. I don't think that work has ever been done before. As far as I know, it's the first time it's actually been done, comparing a single species crop compared to a multi-species crop. But additional benefits, it's not just simply the weight gains. Remember, this is pasture crop as well. We can sow multi-species crops by ploughing and conventional agriculture, but these are the additional benefits if we pasture crop them, those multi-species crops as well. We obviously get improvement in animal health, insect control, cell structure, nutrient cycling, water infiltration, soil carbon, and improvement in the soil ecosystems. And while we're doing that, we're actually also restoring the grassland as well. So there's a lot of benefits in this. Now, that's it into that trial, but I've just got a little bit here on just a barley crop we planted this year, just to give people an idea of what a pasture crop looks like. And if we look at, I've got May, June, July, and August here, those 4 photos, sown into grassland, and really, with a pasture crop, it really looks quite messy when it's first coming up. and doesn't look anything like a normal crop. And I tell people, don't show it to your bank manager when it looks like this, because he won't be very impressed. So, but what happens with this grass, the grass is all still there, but the crop starts growing up above it, and also that grass starts to break down and decompose, the dry grass, all that is dry, dormant grass, remember? And then even by now, August, you struggle to see the grass. Grass is still all in there, through that crop and onto the ground. Now it starts to look like a normal crop. So I'll keep taking photos of this crop as it progresses, and some other crops as well. We've got some oat crops as well. So I'll keep monitoring those and taking photos and all that to present at these types of webinars. Now, another thing too, 2 years ago, I had a multi-species crop in the paddock. I just went back only a couple of days ago and took this other photo, the photo on the right, in roughly the same spot, not exactly, but roughly the same spot, and the grassland and the pasture is far better. Okay, we've had a good season this year, but if that was a conventionally sown crop, that pasture would be worse, not better. So it's just a good, simple photographic illustration of what can happen in a paddock. There's a lot of clover in there, which that clover's from my father's era, but there's native green cool season grasses in there. The dry grass are the dormant warm season grasses. So it just gives an idea of what happens after a single species pasture crop or a multi-species pasture crop. Now, this is just a little bit on native grass seed. This year we have had a good season, as a lot of Eastern Australia has, or some of Eastern Australia has. We harvested 2 tonne of native grass seed this year. We often harvest a tonne, but this year we had a lot of orders for seed, and so we harvested 2 tonne of seed from our grasslands here. And what I'm doing here, like a lot of that's been sold. A lot of it is sold for mine rehabilitation work. Some sold to fellow farmers wanting to restore the grasslands on their property. But I'm also working with Sydney University and the Aboriginal Kamilaroi people, which is about 3 hours north of me here at Narrabri. Now, the photo on the left there is actually an Aboriginal grinding stone that I found here on the property, and which is used for grinding native grass seed. What we've done, and the Sydney University have been working out in conjunction with me and other people, what we can use these native grass seeds for. This particular one, a good friend of mine who's a far better cook than I am, decided to make some little dampers, and this is Warrego grass flour here, which that seed there is, and it's ground into flour. Sydney Uni ground that flour, and we made some little dampers out of it. So there's potential in some of this seed now for a human food source, and I'm going to continue pursuing that, and certainly working very closely with the Aboriginal people near Narrabri and the Sydney Uni. Sydney Uni have got a research centre there, which is why it's at Narrabri. So very, very interesting stuff. So pasture cropping has many benefits, soil carbon being one. This is a slide I use often, and it shows that we've increased carbon by over 200% on the property and sequestered pretty well more than 60 tonne of, well, no, around about 60 tonne of carbon per hectare, which is over 300 tonne of carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere and put in the soil. This also increased water holding capacity by 200%, and all of the nutrients have increased by 172% as well. But what we're doing now is baselining, which we did this year, baselining the property for carbon, seeing what's on here, and then we're going to retest it in 5 years' time to see and measure our carbon again. And from the results we've already seen, we know we can increase the carbon, and then carbon is worth about, I think, $12 to $14 a tonne for carbon dioxide at the moment, which we can now get paid for. that's another story in itself. So we can restore grassland or diverse perennial pastures and repair soil. And restoring the grassland is increased insect numbers and diversity. And now the property no longer gets insect attacked in crops or pastures. Now, what I've got here is that photo is just a handful of seed from some seed we harvested this year. And there's over 12 lady beetles in that little sample. And spiders as well, which really demonstrates how many insects we've got on the property here. The reasons for adopting pasture cropping can be many: grain, forage production, restoring grasslands, increasing carbon, improving soil nutrient cycling, soil biology, restoring the soil ecosystem, and restoring the farm ecosystem. Now, the difference in that is industrial agriculture is about grain yields. But pasture croppers have diverse reasons for growing crops. Many people adopt pasture cropping for many of those things up there, but in reality, all of the above can be achieved with pasture cropping, not just simply grain yields. So just to sum all this up, plants will restore our farms' soil and profit, and agriculture can be more profitable and generate our farms, so ecosystems and the planet, but we need to do it differently. We need our agricultural methods to function closer to how nature had originally designed. Thank you.
Awesome, Cole. Thank you so much. Guys, we don't have too much time left. So what we might do, Cole, is just jump straight into some questions. We've got some really good ones that have come through. First one is from Ellen Sharp. It says, I'd love to hear about the actual equipment you use for seeding, and what should we ask our contractor about when we are working out who to use?
It needs to be a zero-till machine or direct drill machine. Now, and there's two main types. There's a disc machine, a disc zero-till seed drill, or a tine which has a narrow point on it. Now, it depends on what your soil is like. If you have hard, compacted soils, you are better off with a knife point to sow the crops. If your soils are friable, a disc drill can be really good. So it depends on what your soils are like. And again, I address that in more detail in the course as well. We've got a section on machinery. But it's a great question, and even more relevant when we look at if you're buying a machine as well, or converting a machine to zero-till or direct drill.
Thank you, Cole. Next question is from Sandy Benson. Sandy's asked, where do I start on land that I've just moved on to? Do I start planting into one paddock/several? And how long do I leave it for before I let animals graze? Small scale stuff.
Okay, yep. Before it's grazed, it needs to be, generally rule of thumb, at least a foot high. But in reality, if you can get that plant, twist it and pull it, and it tears off, not pulls out of the ground, it can be grazed. But you're better off to leave it until it's at least, say, 30 centimetres high or higher, 30 to 40 centimetres high. If it's, say, an oak crop or a multi-species crop, it should be about that high before it's grazed. That I think answered both of those. That answered those questions, I think.
Yep. Yeah, and guys, again, keep adding questions if you want to. If more pop up, feel free, and we'll get through as many as we can. Next comment. I think this is a comment from Rach. She was on our last webinar with us, Cole. Not a farmer, but work with local farming communities and keen for some new ideas to share on dry land farming. Again, I think that's more of a statement, but Rach, check out the course and you'll get plenty of ideas. Next is from Karen. What can we expect by planting barley into pasture late? And side note to that, Cole, it says we are planting now.
Okay, good. Planting now is quite late. I'm assuming in Australia. I assume it's in Australia.
Yep.
It is in Australia. Planting barley now quite late. It is very late. You certainly won't. Well, you won't. If you're looking to get grain off it, you certainly won't get any grazing. It'll grow and run to head and again, depending where you are, the harvest will be quite late. So it's really quite marginal sowing this late in the season in most areas of Australia.
Thank you, Cole. Also interested in hearing about species of native perennial grasses we could look at for this area, which is orange, just down the road, mate.
Yep. Orange is similar to what we've got here. There's quite a lot of different types of grasses. Often, like I haven't planted any native grass seed on this problem. I've not sown any. What I've done is managed for them. So, and this is what I recommend all the time. I do a lot of on-farm consulting work, and usually most people don't need to sow anything much, which might seem like a ridiculous statement because I'm selling native grass seed. So I usually talk people out of buying seed off me. So I'm not a very good salesman. Because there is often a lot of, or plenty of seed in the soil if we manage for them. And that's certainly what happened here. Change the grazing management practices to more of a rotation, so give plants time to recover. And these pasture cropping techniques will definitely encourage germination of seed that is sitting in the soil. It's one of the best things that it does. So you may not need to sow anything. That depends on if the farm is, if it is a property that's been farmed and ploughed, or ploughed and herbicide used for a long time, you may not have much seed left. But if it's an old grazing place with a little bit of cropping, it's probably plenty of seed there.
Amazing. I'd just like to add to that, Cole, when we went out to the Haggertys, they were having a similar experience with native seeds laying dormant in this soil until obviously it was activated and was able to flourish. Next question is from Kira Lee. My soil is seriously lacking in organic matter. What is the best place to start to try and increase this, please?
Yeah, that's a good one. And grow plants. Plants will fix pretty well everything. And again, in the course, I think it'll probably drive most people mad because I talk about plants all the time. Now, a way of doing that quickly to fix a degraded paddock that is low in organic matter is grow those multi-species crops like I just had there. That mix that I had there is a good winter mix. Oats is better than barley, but whatever seed you can get relatively cheap. Then follow that up with a summer multi-species mix based on things like millet, cowpeas, sunflowers, all that type of thing. And so, in other words, you're layering one crop on top of another, then go back in with a winter one the following year. Generally, by the time you do that for a couple of years, you'll improve the soil structure, add organic matter, and turn that paddock around. That is the best way I've found of doing it. You can also generate income off it by grazing it, but you wouldn't overgraze it in that situation. You'd leave plenty of biomass on the paddock.
Magic, Cole. Next is from Karen. We usually plant winter and summer grain crops in black soil. We have some light soil country as well. Can this technique be used for summer cropping?
Certainly can. Yes. Yes, it can. And as I just said then, we can sow multi-species crops. It depends. I'm assuming you're talking about cash crops. It depends on where you are too. Like remember, pasture cropping is about growing crops into perennial grass species when they're at their dormant stage. So That works better as you go further south in Australia, where a lot of the warm season grasses have been lost over time through grazing and cropping practices, but plenty of cool season grasses, sort of down southern New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia, southern part of Western Australia. So yes, you can, and it is a good way to do it. Just reverse the whole process around, put summer crops in instead of winter ones.
No problem, Cole. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to try and squeeze these in. I feel like we're on a game show now. The heart rate's starting to go up. That was a multifaceted question from Karen. The next part of it is compaction likely from livestock grazing?
Can be. Now, I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can. The problem with livestock and compaction is not the livestock, but bare soil. Bare soil and no root mass, no roots in the soil. When we're grazing, especially multi-species crops and paddocks that are pasture crop, we still have those roots in the soil, so you've got a buffering effect. So generally, no, there isn't a problem, but when we first start, we need to be aware that our soils may not be functioning well enough yet. So, but no, there isn't a problem, certainly not here and haven't been for a long time with that.
Okay. Thank you, mate. Guys, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Any questions that we haven't got to, what we're going to do is we'll have a chat with, we'll take Cole through those once we're off the webinar, and we'll make sure for those that have asked the questions, we'll email you the answer so we can make sure that you're getting everything you need out of this experience. Just again, Colin, thank you for your time. Thank you to everybody who's attended. If you have any questions, please email admin@smartsoil.com.au. The course itself, for those of you that haven't seen it, you're able to purchase the course on www.smartsoiledu.com. The course is on there. You can go check out the price, 519 AUD. We also have Afterpay. So we understand a lot of people that's a big investment. Afterpay is available in which you can pay in incremented amounts. So we hope that helps. Again, thank you so much to everyone. We'll wrap it up. Cole, take care. We'll have a chat over the next few days, mate. And as I said, if you have any questions, contact us on Facebook or email, and we look forward to hearing from you all soon. Thank you so much.
Send in more questions if you wish.
Yeah, send in your questions. We'll make sure Cole gets them and we'll get them out to you. Thank you, guys. Have a beautiful evening. Thank you, Cole.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for watching. If you're interested in our online courses, then simply go onto our website with the link below. And if you want to see more regenerative media and stories that are similar to what you've watched today, also subscribe to our YouTube channel. It would help us out a lot. Thanks so much.